Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Breaking the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and this weekend I am joined by a very special, regular occurring co-host here on the show, Kenneth Cotterill. Kenneth, what's up, my brother? How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Up here in Canada, just another blizzard. Just a classic December up here.
Same
CFL playoffs
old.
this weekend. Yeah, it's a nice and warm 20 degrees. So I know that's definitely your type of weather. So no, just
Oh,
super
dude,
excited to
yeah.
talk some hoops. There's been a lot of fun things happening in the NBA and college basketball. We're in full swing of that as well. We're not going to talk about that today, but man, we've already seen Gonzaga lose a couple times. Duke lost. Like it's a lot of fun in college this year.
Yeah, I mean, we could touch on college for a little bit. I mean, we're talking about future NBA players in the making here, and it was a very fun weekend. I mean, you touched on Gonzaga. I mean, them losing that game to Alabama. Alabama, just sports in general, had a big day yesterday, which was pretty fun to see. I guess if you're not a Georgia fan or a Gonzaga fan, but overall, it made for some good sports. But did you get a chance to watch both of those games, Kenneth?
Uh, I did tune in a little bit to the Gonzaga game. Unfortunately, I did have some time with the wifey plans, so
There you
I
go.
just tuned in a little bit. But I did get a chance to watch a bit of Auburn Yale yesterday. Obviously, Auburn blew them out, which was expected, but that was a fun game to watch. And then USC just gutting it out over Washington State was another one that I was keeping an eye on because I'm not sure about USC this year. They're a team, the Pac 12 in general, I think we could see something similar to what we saw last year, where there's not a lot of top heavy teams. Like we've already seen Oregon lose pretty badly to BYU. So that's a conference that I'm keeping an eye on this year for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good sports all the way around, and we're going to be talking the NBA as we normally do here, Kenneth. And what a interesting couple of weeks that we've had. I mean, we're going to be talking about a slate of teams here today that we're riding the wave right now, is what I'm entitling this episode, because there's teams that are on their last 10 games they've won 7 of 3, 8 of 2, 9 of 1. We're not going to be talking about your Phoenix Suns and your Golden State Warriors, because that's the topic of conversation everywhere else. We're going to shed a little bit more love on some of these unsung heroes, teams that are doing everything that they can to position themselves well within the rankings. But again, they're playing terrific basketball, some of them kind of against the odds. And it's going to be a fun episode. But before we even get into that, Kenneth, we're going to be talking about your power rankings today, and I'll go ahead and call them up for all the people that are tuning in live. If you are, thank you. And if you're listening, we're going to do the same thing what we have been doing the previous couple weeks. I'm going to ask Kenneth a couple questions about some of the teams that are in particular positions, whether that be maybe I don't necessarily fully agree, or maybe they're a team that's slipping and they need a little bit of a light shown on them, or the opposite. Maybe they're performing well and not a lot of people are talking about them. So, Kenneth, looking at the left side of the bracket, this is my favorite side. I'll go ahead and read all 15 teams, 1 through 15 here. We have the Golden State Warriors, the Phoenix Suns, the Brooklyn Nets, the Utah Jazz, the Chicago Bulls, Milwaukee Bucks, Miami Heat, Washington Wizards, Los Angeles Clippers, the Dallas Mavericks, Charlotte Hornets, Atlanta Hawks, Cleveland Cavaliers, Philadelphia 76ers, and then rounding out the left side of the graphic here at number 15 are the Memphis Grizzlies. So, Kenneth, before I get into the questions, were there any teams on here that were kind of hard to decipher where they should be? There are a couple teams that are now on the right side of the bracket that on our last week's show appeared on the left side. What was kind of some of the difficult decisions that you had to make this week?
I mean, we have to finally start punishing teams, I think, is more so what it is than anything else, because it's week 7. So we're almost 2 months into the season. So the whole, oh, well, they're just out to a slow start, they'll bounce back. Well, if they haven't bounced back yet, then you have to punish those teams. And so that's why you see teams like the Knicks moving over to the right side, the Lakers moving over to the right side, even teams like Denver moving over to the right side. And a lot of theirs has to do with injuries, but injuries are a part of the game. And so I struggled with those ones. The Clippers was a tough team for me where to put them, because they've looked really good some nights. They've looked pretty poor some nights. And so I settled on them at 9. It might have been a bit too high, but I still have a lot of faith in this team. led by Paul George, because I think he's having a very good season and it's not being talked about a lot because everyone just writes it off as, oh, well, the Clippers don't have Kawhi. It's like, well, you also have to just like give them credit. Like they've been winning basketball games, and I was low on them heading into the year. I said they were going to be the 9th seed in the West because I thought, well, once you get past Paul George, then there's no one else. Well, he's performed well. He's had some help from his supporting cast, and so that was a team that was tough for me to move around. And then you have a team like Cleveland and Memphis that I basically, because I put the Knicks and Lakers over there, I rewarded them by moving them to the left side. We're going to talk about Memphis a little bit later on, but to key in on Cleveland, they've won 4 games in a row. They got Evan Mobley back, and they've looked really good. So why wouldn't you reward a team that's won 4 in a row? So I had to move them over to the left side. They're one of the better defensive teams in the league, which we couldn't say for a long time in Cleveland. And having Mobley and Garland playing well and Jared Allen playing well, I felt like I had to reward them. So those are some of the teams that saw a bit more movement than others.
For sure. And we have a member of our network, a friend of the show, obviously he's a part of the network. You're going to be listening to him on the Dash radios, off of the Ball Monday special that we have here. Mo Murphy, he's a Miami Heat guy. He's also a LeBron James fan, but he's a Miami Heat guy. And I remember when you dropped these rankings in the group chat, shout out to the group chat, he saw that Miami was ranked number 7th overall and took a little bit of exception to it. He wasn't like vehemently opposed to it, but he saw it at face value and was like, whoa, wait a minute. How can you have them at number 7? But Kenneth, I'm looking at these teams 1 through 6. I think maybe the highest you could put them might be 6. I mean, are we going to argue a spot? You know what I mean? So I think because we're going to talk about Milwaukee here soon, they're riding a wave, but we're going to talk about the strength of their schedule that they've gone up against. I think that that's going to be a big point of the conversation moving forward. But Miami at number 7, I don't really see anything, like I said, too terribly wrong with it. What's been your evaluation of Miami so far this year?
I mean, the big reason why, because Miami last week was at 5, and so Chicago jumped them. And I mean, last night, Chicago, they won over Brooklyn on the road. So like I can't put that with these rankings because I put them out yesterday afternoon. The game happened in the evening, but they have won 3 in a row, 2 in a row when I put them out. They're 6-4 over their last 10. Miami's 5-5, and they just lost Bam Adebayo. Like, he just had surgery. There's no timetable for his return. So that kind of knocked them down a spot for me because it's like, okay, well, you're missing your all-star center. Jimmy Butler's been missing for a few games these past few with a back issue. So they've been relying a lot on Tyler Hero and Kyle Lowry to carry the load for this team. And so Milwaukee, they've won 9 of 10. So they're one of the hottest teams in the league. So how could I not have them ahead of Miami? So Miami was a tough team to determine. I felt like the top 4 was pretty much locked in. Like when you have Golden State and Phoenix, they were on hot streaks and they just traded wins. Brooklyn's won 7 of 10. Utah, they're 15-7 on the year. They're having another good year. And then Chicago, 16-8. And so 15-8 when I put them out. And so Miami at 7, I think, is more so just I'm almost like preparing myself for Miami to go through a little bit of a struggle here because you're missing your all-star center, because you're missing your all-star small forward / shooting guard. So I did put them at 7, but I think it's justified based off of the teams ahead of them just playing better basketball right now.
I think that that's totally fair. And then we talked about the Los Angeles Clippers already. That was going to be another team that I pointed out. We're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves here in a little bit, but I'm looking at them. I see them. They're 22nd overall. They're on a good little stretch of games. They did lose, a couple in a row, but they're 7-3 of their last 10, and they're in the playoff picture in the Western Conference. So looking at them at 22, kind of curious as to see what your reasoning is right there.
Yeah, they have won 7 of 10, so they definitely could have been justified being a bit higher. Minnesota
7 of 10. Yep, you're right. Yep.
Yeah. So Minnesota is just a team where like I'm still in wait and see mode with them because they played really hot out of the gate and then they cooled off and then they've played really well now. And now it's like, okay, now can this be sustained? Because Minnesota goes through those stretches and it may be a little bit low on them. Maybe I'm thinking that they're going to come back down to earth, and that's why I'm keeping them kind of in that 22 range. But I mean, if they keep it up for another week, they're going to jump past teams like the Raptors and teams like Denver and Portland. And, we're expecting at some point those last three teams at the top in the Knicks, Celtics, and Lakers will make a jump to the left at some point. But right now, they don't deserve to be on the left side of the bracket. And then one team I wanted to highlight, they moved from 25 down to 30. That's Oklahoma City. I think you have to. Like you just lost a basketball game by 73 points. You've lost 8 in a row.
ever, the worst deficit in NBA history.
Worst deficit in NBA history. And I felt like, well, you've lost 8 in a row. Yeah, Detroit's done the same, but they've looked a bit more competitive in those games. So that's why I had to put Oklahoma City down at the bottom. And one of the biggest risers actually of the week was the Houston Rockets.
Exactly.
They went up 5 spots, but you won 5 straight games. So a couple weeks ago on my show, we were talking about, well, is Houston potentially an all-time bad team? I think they must have watched the episode and said, like, well, I'll show you. So I had to give them some love. And also the Spurs moving up a couple spots as well. They were a bit lower and they've won 4 in a row. So if these teams, though, they keep winning games, they're going to move up the rankings. Like, I feel like I've taken my bias as a Lakers fan out of it. They're on the right side of the bracket. A lot of people would say, wow, you really think the Lakers are the 18th best team in the NBA? The way that they're playing right now, yes. Yes, they are. And that might even be generous.
Yeah.
So I think putting them on the right side is justified. Knicks fans will crucify the fact that they're on the right side as well, but they just lost to Denver badly at home yesterday. So I think that just goes to show why they're on there as well.
We're not a Knicks loving show here on Nothing But Net, but we are a Knicks friendly show. And all I'll say is them being 16, I think that's us. That's you, Kenneth, looking optimistically at this team, at their recent history, not their last 15 seasons or anything like that, but their recent history. I think that they'll figure things out, and I think that it's a pretty optimistic way to look at things. And Sage Alvarez, a friend of the show, friend of the network, writes in and says, all I see are goats. Thank you very much, Sage, for tuning in. Much appreciated, brother. Kenneth, we're going to go ahead and start riding the wave. But before we do, why don't you tell the friendly listeners and viewers a little bit about Built Bar?
For sure. Built Bar is the newest sponsor of the Off the Ball Network. If your kids find out how good these bars truly are, you're going to have to buy more. They've got great flavors such as cookies and cream, strawberry, and peanut butter brownie. I saw earlier this week they had another one. It was like a caramel flavor, which I'm excited to try. But Built Bar also has a mystery flavor. And if you guess the flavor correctly, you could win a prize. So use the promo code OFFTHEBALL in all caps at checkout. You get a 10% discount when you do so at built.com. So go check it out. Fiance and I putting in our second order this week for these bars. They're really good. They even have the bites as well, which is just like a smaller version of them. And they're great if you just need a little bit of a pick-me-up mid-afternoon and you don't want to eat a whole protein bar. So go check them out at built.com. Use promo code OFFTHEBALL in all caps.
Yeah, shout out to Off the Ball. This is where Kenneth and I kind of reside. There is the Off the Ball Network, where you can go to offtheballnetwork.com for all of your sports needs. We talk about basketball, football, professionally and collegiate. Baseball is in there. We get some good fighting stuff in there from our buddy Pat over from Bets on Bets on Bets and the Say It Out Loud show. But Kenneth, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to you, man. We're going to be talking about riding the wave, teams that have been on, some good little streaks out of their last 10 games. So you get us started with the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, Brooklyn, I think a lot of people expected them to not be the 3rd overall record in the NBA right now because there's been no Kyrie Irving this year. And that was the entire offseason with them, was all about Kyrie and like, oh, well, he's not going to play. So like, how can we expect Brooklyn? They have 2 all NBA caliber players on their team still. Like, yeah, Kyrie, is that a massive loss for sure? But when you have Kevin Durant playing like the runner up for MVP right now, because I got to give that one to Steph.
That's fair right now.
But then you have James Harden, who's taken a little bit of a different role almost with this team compared to what he's done in the past, because we've seen James Harden average 35 points in the league. He's averaging 20 this year, but at 9 assists and 8 rebounds a game, he's getting other guys involved. And Brooklyn's roster, we expected the addition of Patty Mills was going to be big for this team to play that kind of 6-man role for them. A 12-point per game guy this year, that's been big. along with LaMarcus Aldridge coming out of retirement,
Yeah.
averaging almost 14 a game. It's good to see him back on the court and playing well for this group. So I want to see down the road. We just saw Joe Harris go down with his
Yeah.
issue. So he had surgery. He's going to be out for a long time. So let's see if some of these other guys can step up. I think the Cam Thomases of the world are going to have a lot more opportunity in this lineup to prove that they deserve minutes. And I think Steve Nash has done a great job with this group of getting up and down, just giving the ball to your best players and saying, go to work. Like, you don't need to do the X's and O's with guys like Durant and Harden. They've been playing the game for so long that it's really not necessary. So I've just been impressed by Brooklyn as a whole. What have you thought about Brooklyn?
I mean, to your point about James Harden, I think that we saw what he's doing this season, even last year. And I think that sometimes it can take, not just you, Kenneth, but, sports fans in general, it could take them a little bit longer of a sample size to see James Harden in this current role and be like, okay, I buy it, because he's always been kind of a ball dominant, selfish, quote unquote selfish. But when you're playing for a team and they tell you to take that many shots, you're doing what your team is asking you to do. James come into this team, you look at Kyrie Irving, NBA champion. You look at Kevin Durant, NBA champion. Brooklyn was the exact type of team that James Harden needed to come to be like, okay, if I'm going to change my role, it has to make sense. If he went to Philadelphia, it wouldn't make sense for him to have to change his role, because he's going to a team with a Ben Simmons, not an NBA champion, Joel Embiid, not an NBA champion. They don't have as many accolades as James Harden. So in my head, it would make sense for them to have to acquiesce to him and his playing style. James Harden coming to a team, like I said, where a lot of hardware between the big three there, but he doesn't have a ring. So obviously it would make sense to me that he would have to change his playing style. I thought he did that last season. This season, it's emphasized even more because you don't have a Kyrie Irving taking over that scoring role. So now you have, outside of Kevin Durant, you mentioned a Patty Mills, a LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin every once in a while. They added Paul Millsap this season. Bruce Brown is an unsung hero for this team, kind of a do-it-all wing player for that team. Cam Thomas is a rookie, having a couple of decent performances as well. James Harden is feeding all the mouths in Brooklyn, and they still have one of the best closeout players in the NBA today, and Kevin Durant, that you can give the ball to in big clutch time moments, which was the big knock against James Harden, right? So I'm looking at Brooklyn. I'm looking at the games that they've recently played. They dropped a 4-point game to the Chicago Bulls, who really good team. They beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. They beat the Knicks by 2. They lose to the Suns by 6. That's not a bad loss at all. They whooped the Celtics. They beat the Cavaliers by 5. They beat the Magic. They beat the Cavaliers again. And then they lose to the Warriors. So the reason, I wanted to bring up the Brooklyn Nets in the show is everyone's talking about the big 2 teams out of the Western Conference. We're not going to be doing that today. But Brooklyn in the Eastern Conference is still doing what they need to be doing to be a prevalent and scary team to watch out for moving forward. So, Kenneth, looking down the line, they have a decent stretch of games coming up. On Tuesday, December 7th, they have the Dallas Mavericks. Then they have the Houston Rockets the next day. A couple days later, they have the Atlanta Hawks, and then the Detroit Pistons, the Toronto Raptors, the Sixers, the Magic, the Nuggets, the Wizards, the Blazers. Kind of nice even spread of, talent level there. There's games that they should absolutely win and games that they should absolutely lose. What's your outlook on Brooklyn moving forward here in the short term? Like, let's say between now and our next show next Sunday.
Yeah, I just want to touch quickly on like the games that they have played. Like, so they got 7 losses on the year, and none of them are bad losses. Like we've seen it all year from teams where like the Lakers losing twice to Oklahoma City, and like teams just drop games to bad teams. Outside of the opener to the Bucks where they lost by 23, all their losses have been to teams that are in the playoffs. So they haven't dropped those Detroit Pistons games or those San Antonio Spurs games. Like, those aren't the teams that they're losing to. And so that's why I think I've been so impressed with Brooklyn, because they're taking care of business against the teams that they should. But then, like, even losing to Chicago twice this year, like, those games were close. So even when they played Phoenix, close game. So it's okay that they lose some of those games. Like, we can't expect this team to win like 75 games, like, because guess what? No team's ever won 75 games in a season. So looking at their next stretch, the Luka game's going to be a fun one on the road. He's someone where I think he's going to be super motivated for that game. And then you get the Rockets on the back-to-back. You get the Hawks.
And
So they're
shout
going
out
to have
real
a
quick to
short.
Kristaps Porzingis having a season that no one wants to give him any sort of credit
They'll
for at
never
all.
give him credit for having a good season because he just doesn't do enough to help Dallas. Yeah, but they're going on this 4-game road trip. Couple games in there that should be quote unquote gimmies, and then you've got a couple. Atlanta's a team that's we anticipate is going to be battling them potentially in the playoffs, and then you've got the Mavericks, a good team there. So I think on the road they've been really good this year. I think they're 8-2 on the road, so one of the better road teams in the NBA this year. So.
Yep.
I could see them going 3-1 over this stretch, even a potential 4-0 sweep. But worst case scenario for me, it's a 2-2 week. We come back and we still assume that Brooklyn's good, and they just maybe dropped a couple road games. So even if they did, they'd be 10-4 on the road this time next week. So not exactly struggling to get victories away from the Barclays Center.
Yeah, and the Dallas Mavericks are only 6-5 at home, so it's not like they're going to, the Philadelphia 76ers of last season or anything like that, right? So we'll transition now. And like I said, we're not going to be talking about the Warriors and the Suns. So, if you're tuning in to listen to them, I'm sorry, maybe next week. But we're going to be talking about the Utah Jazz because, quite frankly, no one ever does. You look at this team right now, they're 15-7. They're 9-2 in conference play, 9-4 at home, 6-3 on the road. They're winners of their last 3, and they are on a 7-3, record in their last 10 games. Kenneth, you look at their last couple games. They beat the Celtics by 7, beat the Blazers by over 20. They beat the Pelicans by over 20. They lose to the Pelicans by 1 the night before. They beat the Sun. They beat the Thunder. They lose to the Grizzlies by 1. Then they beat the Kings. They beat the Raptors. They whoop the Sixers, and then lose a close game to the Miami Heat. Kenneth, you look at this Utah Jazz team, they're not really doing anything different than they ever really have. They added a couple pieces in Rudy Gay and Hassan Whiteside. Real quick, shout out to the backup centers of the NBA this season. It's been a quietly big year for backup centers in the NBA, Hassan Whiteside being one of them. But, they add to the depth of this team. They draft well, in my opinion. Forrest on this team, Trent Forrest, kind of quietly coming up out of nowhere, having a nice couple of big not big, but nice performances for the Jazz. Conley has had some big moments. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell is the leading threat on this team on the scoring end, but Rudy Gobert kind of still doing Rudy Gobert things. Kenneth, what have you made of the Utah Jazz season so far?
I mean, what's crazy is that over their last 10, like those 3 losses were by a combined 8 points. So even when they're losing games as of late, like it's not like they're getting blown off the floor. And everyone will point to, wow, you really lost the Pelicans and the Grizzlies. Like, okay, well, it's an 82 game schedule. Like we expect these teams to lose games throughout the year. It happens in all sports.
All teams have had a loss like that this season. There's not a one of them.
Exactly. So there's no cause for concern on that front. I mean, look at Utah overall. When you're looking at their stats, they make the most threes in the league per game. They shoot the second highest percentage in the league this year. They're number 1 in offensive rating overall. If anything, the defensive rating took a little bit of a hit from years past, but Utah's not a team that you're worried about defensively come playoff time. Like you have Rudy Gobert as your anchor down there. Joe Ingles is a solid defender. Mitchell and Connolly, I think, are improving as defenders. Even Connolly, in his older age, I think he's still a solid defender at the point guard position. So this is not a team that I'm overall concerned about. And I never was at any point throughout the season. Like Utah dropped a couple games, and people are like, "Whoa!" And it's like, relax. It's like the 3rd week of the year. We're expecting Utah to win 55 games this year. They're on pace to do that. So it's almost like I'm trying to think of how to word it. It's almost like, okay, yeah, this is what we expected. This is what Utah does. They're a deep team. Even if they have an injury or two, it's next man up, and they have the roster in order to do that. Whiteside's been a good backup center. Rudy Gay, when he's played, has given them some quality minutes as well. So yeah, this isn't a team that I'm overly concerned about in the West. As far as regular season goes, once we start to get into the playoffs, then it's okay, now let's see you go out and do it in the playoffs finally. So this isn't a team that I'm concerned about moving forward. They're gonna win. They'll be in the top 3 in the Western Conference this year, pretty easily.
Yeah, they just remind me of what Milwaukee used to be before last season, where it's like, okay, Utah, like we know, we see you, you're winning games, congratulations, but what else can you do? You know,
Yeah.
can you win in the playoffs? And that's where everyone's at right now. I mean, you look at a guy like Jordan Clarkson, who also shout out to all the six men in the NBA this year. I mean, this might be the most competitive six-man race in quite some time, where you don't even talk about a guy like Jordan Clarkson, but you know, he's had some really big games for this team as well. And then shout out to Bogdanovich still doing his thing. I mean, Quinn Snyder has done a good job of acquiring good talent and really distributing out minutes to where it's not really a one-man show ultimately, other than Donovan Mitchell just being the leading scorer on this team, which is kind of the same old song and dance again there. So Kenneth, I'm looking down the line. They got a decent matchup against the Cavaliers coming up, against the Minnesota Timberwolves. We'll talk about them more here in a little bit. The Philadelphia 76ers, the Wizards, the Clippers, the Spurs, the Wizards again, the Hornets, the Wolves, the Mavericks. Not really necessarily the world beaters of the NBA, but all of them are in, you know, kind of that playoff play-in contention mix. So can't take any of these games lightly. What's your outlook on Utah between now and next Sunday when we get together again?
I mean, similar situation to Brooklyn, 4-game road trip now. They're at Cleveland this afternoon, so they're one of the hottest teams in the league with 4 straight wins. Then you head to Minnesota, another team that's playing well, the 76ers, who just got healthy, and then Washington, we're starting to see some cracks, and they're starting to maybe fade a little bit. I mean, they're still at top 5 seed in the East, but
They're just not like the best team in
they're
the
just
Eastern
not the
Conference.
best team in the East. So yeah, this is a stretch where I think if you come out of it 2-2, you're not disappointed. If you come out of it 3-1, you consider that a win, and 4-0 is obviously you played some great basketball against some teams that are playing well. So I think that they're going to be just fine over this next little stretch that they have. Because then once you get a big homestand after that, you throw in the Spurs, the Clippers, Wizards. Like, I think there's some winnable games there at home. So just get through this road trip the next week or so, win a couple games, come back home. You're still not going to be the top seed in the Western Conference regardless. So you could win all your games and you're still not going to be. So just be content with the fact that you're still third in the West, and it's a long season, and we'll see if Golden State and Phoenix can keep it up.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So, Kenneth, I'll just go ahead and real quick touch pass to you for the Milwaukee Bucks, man. I mean, give us a run through on how they're doing so far this year.
I mean, Milwaukee, everyone panicked out of the gate because, even in my own power rankings, like I kept them on the left side, and everyone's like, "How do you have Milwaukee there? Like they're a 500 team right now." It's like, am I really going to move the defending champions to the right side because they had Chris Middleton miss some games, Drew Holiday miss some games, and then they
Brook
lose
Lopez.
close, and they don't have Lopez now for a long time, and they're still winning games. Like, it's not like they were Atlanta bad out of the gate. They dropped some games, and they had some tough games out of the gate. We can't forget the fact that they blew out Brooklyn on opening night. So this is a team, they've won 9 of 10 now. They got healthy outside of Lopez. Shout out to him. Hopefully he comes back at some point this season, but back issues, especially later in your career, are tough to overcome. But I believe it was them that signed Demarcus Cousins, was it
Yep,
not?
100%.
So you bring in Demarcus Cousins, who
Just
he's
put
wanting
up
to win a
11
ring.
against the Miami Heat
Yeah.
in their big win. He had a big night.
And he wants to win a championship. Like, there's a reason why he went to Milwaukee, because they're one of the top 3 to 5 teams in the NBA once again this year, giving him a great opportunity to also earn minutes on this team. And he's performed in those minutes. So Milwaukee, they're an incredibly deep team. You've got their big 3. One of the more underrated offseason moves was bringing in Grayson Allen, because as much as people hated him in college, he's been playing heavy minutes for this team out of the gate, and he's been performing pretty well. He's had some 20-point nights for them, which is what they need, is some secondary scoring, especially when they were missing Middleton and Holiday. So, yeah, Milwaukee playing great basketball once again. Expecting them to win a lot of regular season games. They're right there now with Brooklyn. Like, they had their slow start, and they're still now only like a game and a half back of Brooklyn. So this is a good basketball team, and I think we're going to see it throughout the years. So what have you seen from Milwaukee so far?
Well, I mean, you talked about the acquisition of Demarcus Cousins. Again, shout out to the backup centers in the NBA this year, right? I mean, he's going to be backing up Brook Lopez when he gets back. Bobby Portis is probably going to be in that starting rotation for quite a little while. But it's good and encouraging to see a guy like Demarcus Cousins, who we at one point just thought he was done, that he was not going to play NBA basketball again. And to be honest, Kenneth, it's not like he was just kind of holding back for a contender to come knock on his door. He just got done playing last season with the Houston Rockets, who really didn't have any hope for much at all. So I think that he just wanted an NBA opportunity. Brooklyn, being desperate, signs him. It almost reminds me of the Portland Trailblazers when they signed Carmelo Anthony a couple seasons back, right? And all you have to do is land on a team where what they do caters to your skill set. In Milwaukee, I mean, how easy is it going to be for DeMarcus Cousins to be a fourth or fifth option, maybe a third, depending on the rotation that he's in? There's really not going to be much demand on him, which is only going to accentuate the positives in his game. And they also added Wesley Matthews, who didn't have a great performance in his first game coming back to the Milwaukee Bucks, but it's good to see that he is in a rotation again. You're looking at Milwaukee that they're 15-9, they're 11-6 in the Eastern Conference play, 8-4 at home, 7-5 on the road. We mentioned that they're 9-10 their last 10 games. Looking down the line, man, they got the Cavaliers, they got the Heat, they got the Rockets, who are on a win streak of sorts here. The New York Knicks, that's going to be a very pivotal and telling matchup for where both of these teams are down the line. The Boston Celtics echo the same sentiment. That's going to be a big matchup for both of those teams. And then they have the Pacers, the Pelicans, the Cavaliers again, the Rockets again, and then Dallas. Kenneth, I'm going to ask you the same thing I've been asking you. I'm going to keep asking you on the next few teams. How are you feeling about Milwaukee moving forward? Because if you look at their previously played games, not really a death march as far as level of competition.
No, this is going to be a pivotal stretch over the next little bit. Getting the Cavs a couple times. You just played the Heat. Hopefully, you play the Heat once again without Jimmy Butler, because that would be huge for you moving forward. And then, yeah, they do have a bit of a road trip coming up after they play Cleveland tomorrow. They got 4 straight on the road. I think Milwaukee, though, they're a team that they thrive in whatever environment they play in, because when you have a guy like Giannis, it's just like, going into a game that you probably have the best player on the court, and then you have a great secondary cast. Like, what was fascinating to me looking at their team, they've got 6 guys averaging over 12 points per game this year.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Like Pat Connaughton, he's the lowest at 12. You've got Grayson at 13, Portis at 15, and then you throw in Middleton and Drew and Giannis. Like, it's kind of crazy that this team just won the championship, and it feels like they've almost gotten better roster-wise, and they didn't have a lot of room to move roster-wise. Keep in mind, when you have the big contracts that you gave that big 3, they were able to go and sign some sneaky good signings. They also brought in Wesley Matthews. I'm curious to see what he has left in the tank, because he's been one of the better 3-point shooters in the league for a long time. And then, yeah, we talked about Cousins as well. So we're now getting into like an 8-9 man rotation, which is going to be tough for these teams to beat them. Like, even on the road, you're going in and you know that you can win in any building that you go into. So I'm not too concerned about Milwaukee at all either. When you have Giannis, who might be the best player in the world right now, he's not the MVP, but he may be the best overall player in the world right now. I think it's just an absolute game changer for them, and he's got a great cast around him to win some games.
No, for sure. And I think that when you have a guy like Giannis as the best player on your team, it's a complete tone setter. It's like Jimmy Butler in Miami, because if your best player has a no nonsense, I'm going to get it done mentality, then it doesn't give anybody else on that team to have kind of that celebrity vibe where it's just like, oh, okay, I want to just look cool playing basketball. This is very much so a Milwaukee Bucks style team, and it has to do with the fact that Giannis is who he is, and he is the character and the type of player that he is. So Kenneth, we're gonna bounce from the Eastern Conference back over to the West. And what's funny is last week we had this team on our slumping episode, But now looking at how they're doing, they're 7-3 of their last 10 games. They're 13-10 overall. They won 4 straight. They're the 4th seed in the Western Conference right now, and they're missing their best player, that being the Memphis Grizzlies without Ja Morant. And they've been missing him since, let's see here, November 26th. And that's when he got injured during that game against the Atlanta Hawks and only played less than 10 minutes. But you look at the games since then, they've blown out the Kings. They beat the Raptors by 7. They put a historical beat down on the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then they beat the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic is on that team. He's pretty good. We just got done talking about how well Kristaps Porzingis has been playing. The Ja Morantless Memphis Grizzlies beat that team by 7. And then tomorrow they have a pivotal matchup against the Miami Heat. Kenneth, we were talking about this team slumping last week. This week, we're talking about how good they're doing without Ja Morant. Make sense of this to me, because it just doesn't.
I want to temper expectations with Memphis because the Raptors aren't exactly world beaters. Neither are Sacramento. They just beat one of the worst teams probably in NBA history in the Oklahoma City Thunder with what they're doing there. The Mavericks win, though, is the one where you got to be like, wow, you went on the road to Dallas, who had a pretty good lineup out there, and you beat them. Like, I know you don't have Porzingis and Doncic in that game, but Dallas has still got some quality players, and you went into their building and won. So this is a team that, I think we're about to find out how good they can be moving forward. You get the Heat on the road, then you come back and play Dallas, and then you play at home against the Lakers. If they go 2-1 over that stretch, then I think we're thinking about them much differently, because as far as I know, the Luka and Porzingis stuff was more so rest than anything else.
Yeah.
So I think they'll be back for that game. They thought, well, we might still be able to win without them, so this is a great opportunity to rest them. Didn't pay off, but we should see them on Wednesday. So, that those next 3 games are going to be telling. Yeah, the Heat aren't going to have Adebayo, probably not Butler either, but that's still a quality basketball team. Miami's a tough place to win. You'll have Dallas healthy. You'll have the Lakers. Probably their big 3 playing. Not that it really matters much right now because they're a dysfunctional group. But then you get your Rockets gimme, and then that's when it starts to take off once again of you have to play Philly and Portland. So it's going to be a tough stretch that they have. But guys like Desmond Bane have played really well. Jaren Jackson Jr. played well.
He's been phenomenal.
Yep. Like, you look at this team, and yeah, like losing Ja, you can't lose a guy that was an early MVP candidate and expect them to like finish the season as like a top 5 or 6 seed in the West. But if they can get through and even just get into the play-in game, like, I think that's what they're fighting for now, is like, look, we're a top 4 seed right now. We expect that we're going to go through a slide at some point. You just have to weather the storm, and then you get Ja back late in the year, hopefully, and then you can make a run at it. But, this is still a pretty deep roster, despite not having Ja. Like we mentioned, Desmond Bane, Jackson, you've got Adams, Melton, Kyle Anderson, Tyus Jones, Brandon Clark. Like, there's a lot of good, not great players on this team. So can this good group of players win some basketball games? I think is what I'm curious to see. What about you?
Yeah, it's the exact same thing on my end. And we talked about this team last week after they beat the brakes off of the Sacramento Kings. And the thing I pointed out is that when you don't have a pecking order, it can be hard to get up and, every game and figure out who is going to be the hot hand for that particular matchup. But it looks like it's going to be any sort of combination between Brooks and Bane, and it's worked out for them so far this season, which is shocking because you would assume that without Ja Morant, that Jaren Jackson Jr. would be kind of the head honcho on this team. But it seems like Memphis and he are perfectly content for him just being just another basketball player out there, which is refreshing, because you can get in trouble sometimes when you're like, we have this guy, we drafted him pretty high, or he's got a crazy contract and we can't afford to not play him type thing. Memphis is just very much so an egalitarian type team where anybody can go off in any night, and as long as they win, that's all right with them. And I love that that's the culture that that they've developed down there in Memphis. So we'll move forward now, Kenneth. We have a pair of play-in caliber teams. As of right now, they may rise, they may fall. We don't know. But right now, if the playoffs were to start today, everybody's favorite saying, they would be the play-in teams in their respective conferences. We'll go ahead and get started with the Atlanta Hawks, who right now are 12-11, who have won 8 of their last 10 games. That's been a huge stretch for them. They are 7-6 in Eastern Conference play. At home, they're great. They're 8-3, but on the road, they're 4-8. Not so good there. Kenneth, we talked about them struggling early so far this season a couple times. It looks like they're hitting their stride. We talked about their youth. We talked about their coaching. We've talked about, Trae Young adjusting to the rules. Why is it starting to click all of a sudden in Atlanta now?
I think they're just starting to get to a point where they have a lot more winnable basketball games. I mean, if we go back just even to mid-November, they beat Orlando at home. They beat the Celtics at home, beat the Hornets at home, beat Oklahoma City at home. None of those teams outside of maybe Charlotte have played particularly great basketball out of the gate. Then even your road games, you went to the Spurs, which you won pretty handily. And then you had the injury to Ja in that Memphis game. So they win handily there. Yeah, you lose a Knicks game, but that game I think was more so the Knicks got up for that one to really shove it in everyone's face that they won that November regular season game. Congrats, Knicks fans. But, it's a big win for them nonetheless. And then they had Indiana on the road. So that was a close game. And then the loss at home to the Sixers by 2. So I think it's more so just the schedule's let up for them over the last little bit. Now they're going to go back into some tougher games, but there's also some winnable games the rest of December. Like we're talking about Minnesota's playing really well, and we're going to touch on them in a minute, but that's a game that you could get on the road. Then you play Brooklyn at home. That's a tough game. You get the Rockets, you get the Magic again down the road. So there's a lot of winnable games here. There's some that are more of a toss-up. Atlanta's, they weathered the early storm. We knew that they had probably the toughest schedule out of the gate. A lot of road games, a lot of tough opponents on the road as well. You just have to weather that storm in the NBA, and every team goes through it at some point in the season. Just some teams go through it for a longer stretch of games. And I think we're going to see them start to rattle off some more wins. They're going to be in that top 4 in the Eastern Conference, especially with the injuries in Miami and Washington coming back down to earth. We're going to see them in the top 4 throughout the season. They're going to continue to climb my power rankings as well. Those are my expectations for Atlanta. Now, whether they pull it off or not is another story. But it's not just Trae Young, John Collins. For whatever reason, people didn't want Atlanta to bring back John Collins, and that was really puzzling to me. And then they got Capella on what I thought was a pretty great contract when they did, and he's proving it by averaging a double-double once again and being that defensive anchor for them. They wouldn't be a great defensive team without Capella, I'll say that much, because there's not a lot of guys on this team that like to defend, and that's the importance of having guys like that. Like we talked about Utah earlier with Gobert. Capella provides that for Atlanta as well, being that defensive anchor. Even if it's just affecting a couple more shots a game, that's the difference in the NBA. Like it is a game of inches. So I'm impressed by Atlanta. They're finally starting to win games. Happy for Atlanta basketball fans in general, because I think they're some of the best fans in the world. So what do you think of Atlanta?
I think, obviously Trae Young is the head of their snake right now, but what's impressing me is how well they're doing without guys like Cam Reddish, who's missed a couple of games here and there. Bogdanovich has missed a couple of games here or there. Collins has really been the only consistent player. We saw that they've added guys like Luwawu Cabarrot, who's filled in nicely, just a guy to come in off the bench. Kevin Hurd. It's not surprising that they're doing well, in my opinion, Kenneth, because this is a team that I had top 3 in the Eastern Conference coming into this season. It's just that now they're doing what they kind of did last year when they added, Coach Nate McMillan, is that it's just like, okay, let's realize that we have talent on this team and actually live up to it. And they changed a couple things as far as schematics and team functionality goes. But Trae Young, adjusting to the rule change, he openly admitted that that's been hard on him. think that he's adjusted fine now. I think that people might have overblown how difficult it was for guys who had trained their bodies to play a certain type of way for so long and muscle memory just to kind of take over. But now you're seeing your James Hardens and your Trey Young starting to play better and adjusting to that rule change difference. These are the best basketball players in the world, and it was only a matter of time before they figured that out. But you talked about their cake schedule so far. Moving forward, listen, when I talk about a cake schedule, obviously you could point to a Brooklyn Nets and be like, what are you talking about? They got to play this team. I'm just saying overall, between this past month of November and looking through the rest of December, this is a favorable time of year for Atlanta. So I would not be surprised, Kenneth, moving forward, that we're going to talk about this team perhaps even next week or the week after that, depending on, the subject matter that we want to discuss. But even still on your rankings, this would not surprise me to see Atlanta continue to move up in those rankings.
Yeah, this is a team that I had to put them. I think the lowest I had them was kind of like low 20s, but you had to just based off of the record that they had. Now you look at them moving back up, and I think that's just going to continue to happen. They have a deep roster. That's the thing about them. Like, we talk about them missing Reddish, but like they're actually pretty loaded at the position that Reddish plays. So while I think he's better than some of those guys, they don't see a massive drop off with him being out. So yeah, I think Atlanta's going to be just fine. I look forward to watching them continue to climb the power rankings.
No doubt, man. So let's close it out with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Kenneth, they're 11-12. Doesn't sound like anything to write home about, but they are ninth place in the Western Conference. They're 7-3 of their last 10 games. Yes, they did. Before a 2-game losing streak, they were 7-1 in their last 8, right? So you look at them, they're a decent enough home team. On the road, not so much. They're 4-6. We've talked about both sides of the rankings with Minnesota so far. What are you seeing with this team? Is it just beneficial? They're just benefiting from the schedule, or is the talent really there? Because they have some pretty notable players on their roster.
Yeah, they definitely do have notable players. Like, I think we're almost surprised that they've been as low as they have been. Like, even last year, yeah, Anthony Edwards was a rookie, but Karl Anthony Towns was there, D'Angelo Russell was there. They still weren't winning games. You look at them, they're playing like a big three this year. Like, Edwards at 22-6-3, Towns at 24-9-3, and Russell at 19-6-4. Those are big three numbers. Like, they may not have, like, Towns is the closest thing that they have to like a LeBron in a big three or a Giannis in a big three, but he's still a good center in the NBA. He went through some difficult times last year, I know, both on and off the court. So that was tough for him. Having guys like Malik Beasley playing well, Naz Reid playing well. We talk about the backup center, Naz Reid.
Shout out to the backup centers.
Shout out to the backup centers. Maybe that should be the title of today's episode. But yeah, like Naz he's played well in his role. I'm not a big Patrick Beverley guy, but 8-4-4.
Not a lot of people are, man. You got to have a particular taste.
You got to have that particular mindset, I think, to be a Patrick Beverley guy. But hey, he's playing 25 minutes a game and averaging 8-4-4. So he's been a solid backup point guard for this group. I think that there's still a year or two away of like, I just hope that Minnesota can have an off season or a free agency where they don't have to go and get another star. But if you could find a couple like what Milwaukee did with Grayson Allen, like what Memphis has done with like their roster from 1 through 10, like they just have a lot of good players.
Utah.
Like, yeah, Jaden McDaniels, I'm not a big fan. He's an okay player. I'm not a big Jaden. I know you do. I'm not as high on him, but like Jared Vanderbilt is another guy where I'm like, it's a name that you're not familiar with, and it's not just because Minnesota is not on TV very often, but I just wish that they had more like Brandon Clark caliber guys on this team, because I think they are that close. I think they are that close that you give them a couple vets, and that's a team that would be tough to beat in the playoffs. You got Towns is a tough matchup. Russell he's proven that he can play in the playoffs when he was in Brooklyn. And then you've got Anthony Edwards, who would get his first taste of playoff basketball. But yeah, this is a group that I want to see them play a bit more. Like we talked about it in the power rankings part. I had them at 22 because I just want to see a bit more. I want to see the team go on a road trip and win some games, or have a homestand and beat some teams that they maybe shouldn't. And so Minnesota, though, it's nice to see them kind of be on the rise, because we talked about them as a bottom 5 team for a long time, and we're not talking about them like that anymore.
No, we criticized their coaching move, and I still thought that there was a lot that you could criticize for the hiring that they did there. But they're going to have that opportunity that you're looking forward to. Kenneth, they got the Atlanta Hawks, who we just got done talking about them. That it's not a sexy name on paper, but it's meaningful, right? Because
Yep.
both of these teams are trying to climb their way up their respective conferences. They got the Utah Jazz, who we talked about earlier in the show, the Cavaliers, who we keep shouting out, although that they're not really a focal point of today's show. The Portland Trailblazers, the Denver Nuggets, the LA Lakers, the Dallas Mavericks, back-to-back games, and then the Utah Jazz again. So moving forward, Kenneth, it's going to be interesting to see how well they come out of these next few games. But I think Minnesota fans would be content if they were at 500 over this next, week of games, maybe slightly above that, maybe a game over 500, because if they can just maintain where they are right now, we're talking about one of their most successful seasons, especially since the departure of Jimmy Butler, Kenneth.
Yeah, this month in general. Like if you go 500 the month of December, I think you call it a win and move on, because you got Utah 3 times this month. You got the Knicks, you've got Boston, you've got Dallas twice, you have the Lakers, you've got Cleveland that's playing well. Like all of these teams we anticipate will be in the playoffs outside of maybe Cleveland, and they still could get into the playoffs this year, and they're
Mm-hmm.
playing good basketball. So yeah, this is a make or break month for Minnesota. Like we could very easily see Minnesota only win a couple games this month, and then they're back down in the lower end of teams. But if you can get through it and get to January, where you then have a stretch of 4 games where you get Oklahoma
I was
City
going to
back
say
to back,
January's not much easier,
Houston,
Kenneth.
Pelicans, like you just have to survive. And that's what the NBA is. Every team kind of has that month where it's like you got to get through that. That's your stretch of games. That's going to determine whether you're going to be the 3 or 4 seed in your conference, or you're going to be your 7, 8 seed, or you're 13, 14 in your conference. So I do look forward to watching these stretch of games. I'm going to tune in when they're playing teams like Utah. I want to see how well, because that's a team that the style that they have actually is pretty close. Like Gobert is more of the defensive center, but Towns versus him, and then you've got Mitchell going up against Edwards, and then you've got Russell and Connolly. Like those are going to be fun games to watch, just the style. And I think
Beasley, Clarkson,
yeah. So this is going to be a fun stretch to watch for Minnesota for sure.
No doubt, man. All right, Kenneth, that's going to close out today's show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to Breaking the Game. Before we get out of here, obviously, Kenneth, I would love to give you the floor just to kind of promote some of the things that you've been doing, and of course, continuing to let our lovely listeners and viewers where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on all social platforms at shooters_pod. I put out my daily betting newsletter on Substack. So go and sign up for that. Sends directly to your email, gives you some plays for the day. A lot of great stuff there. Going to be starting up shooters draft analysis in the next couple weeks here. Just got to get through the busy point of work. And once I'm all done that, then I'm going to have a lot more time to put into that. So go check that out. And then I do have Motor City Hoops coming on the Shoot or Shoot pod on Tuesday night. Took a couple weeks off from my show, but we'll be back on Tuesday night with them. So definitely go check them out, and check out offtheballnetwork.com for all your sports needs. So appreciate you having me on as always, Stephen. It's always a ton of fun chopping it up with you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And just real quick to further plug you, to let the people know where they can find your Substack, that's at shootershootbasketball.substack.com. I'm a subscriber there myself, not just because, me and Kenneth work together, although, being honest, that does play a little bit of a part in it. But, I mean, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, betting articles and newsletters that you can find on Substack right now. As for myself, you can follow me at Stephen G. Hoops on Twitter, Stephen W. Gillespie on Instagram. You can follow our show here, Breaking the Game, at BTG NBA Pod on all social media platforms. Of course, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, where sometimes we have bonus material and content, extended episodes, things of that nature. That's at Breaking the Game, anywhere that you get your podcast. And I just wrote on my Substack, the Substack that I subscribe to. It's at stephengillespie.substack.com. I have a Stephen G. Hoops Top 80 1.0 board that I just did, where obviously I covered the NBA draft with our president, Chris LeBron, over at Draft Capital. I did my Top 80 1.0. I got a lot of really good reviews and a lot of people blowing it up, and it has meant the world to me. I love getting, validation from my peers. It means a lot to me that my contemporaries have given me such good reviews. So all of you guys that are watching and listening, Kenneth, you included, man, I appreciate all the love that you show me on that piece. Please continue to stay tuned and subscribe to my Substack, because I'm going to be continuing to do more things like that moving down the line. So, Kenneth, for Breaking the Game here, why don't you close this out, man?
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Stay tuned on, if you're listening on Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, my show coming up right after. It is a replay of one of my previous episodes, but a really good one with my good pal Ernest Silva. So appreciate everyone that tuned into the live show, and we'll see you guys next Sunday.
Much love, y'all.